It's my nerd world. Welcome to it. How you doing? You okay? Did you make it? How you feeling? I'm feeling fantastic, by the way. On the show this week, my spoiler-filled thoughts about the Rise of Skywalker and why I believe the Star Wars franchise has done something that no other franchise has done before, and it's for this very reason that Star Wars is going to endure for generations upon generations to come. So glad you're with the show again this week. Let's get right to it from a galaxy far, far away.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My nerd world.
Just let it in.
I feel like there's a lot of things that I need to lay out first before I get into my thoughts about the Rise of Skywalker. First off, welcome to the show again this week. Here is the deal when it comes to my nerd world and the Star Wars podcast as we head into the new year. I'm not in a position right now where I can do the full-blown show at the moment because I have family visiting and the circumstances in the household right now just don't allow me to take the time to do the setup that I normally do, especially for the video version of the show. So my intention is there will probably be another full-blown show coming next week, heading into the new year after Christmas, and it'll be that show that will talk further about the Rise of Skywalker, and I'm going to get into all of your listener feedback because I've been getting a ton of it. So next week's show, the last show of the year, will be the show where I'm going to be diving into all of your commentary and comments. And they're very much mixed about this film, just like a lot of the reviews are, and for the people that have already gone and seen it. This, again, is a spoiler-filled show this week, talking about the Rise of Skywalker. I loved this movie. I'm just going to say that up front. If you listen to my non-spoiler thoughts, you know this, but I've seen it twice now. I'm about an hour and a half away from going and seeing it for a third time this morning, and I really do love this film. Keeping in mind, and again, some of the disclaimers, doing that thing with my fingers that I want to put up front. We've got 9 of these films, right? 9 of the saga films, and then of course you add in Rogue One and Solo. You're rounding out sort of the what 11, right? Is there 9, 10, 11? Yeah, 11. And no film, no Star Wars film is ever perfect. I would argue that when you look at the entire saga, and if you want to break down all of the movies and which ones have fewer things that bug me, I'll go back to A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back. There's very little in both of those films that I would probably nitpick. But pretty much for every other Star Wars film, which I love, there are things to nitpick. And there certainly is when it comes to the Rise of Skywalker. But none of it was enough to diminish my full enjoyment of this film. So before I get into my thoughts and I work through a bit of the movie and bullet point kind of the things that stuck out to me after having seen it twice, let me start here and spend just a minute talking about what I just now realized before I sat down to record the show this week. And that is Star Wars has done something without really even intending to do it that no other franchise has ever done before. And the only other franchises that have endured as long as Star Wars have, and probably more specifically when we're talking about adventure and science fiction. You look at the Bond films, okay, the Terminator franchise, and Alien. The only one in there that you can really even sort of point to as coming close to what Star Wars has done in terms of pleasing fans, even though Star Wars has a bigger fan base, is probably James Bond. But even James Bond wasn't created in such a way where they were 3 film arcs, and this is what I'm going to drive into. This is what I'm going to get into. Terminator kind of did that. Alien tried to do that, but those movies are all over the map. I think that the Star Wars franchise has done something unique, and what I'm talking about is we have 3 separate cohesive trilogies among themselves that represent 3 different periods of cinema and society. So the original trilogy, deeply entrenched with the 80s, late 70s, and then early 80s. The prequel trilogy, you're into the late 90s and early 2000s, right? Really early 2000s. And now you get into the sequel trilogy, and we have the modern era. So you have this nostalgia-fueled, because of the time that's gone by, original trilogy that was indicative of its time. You have this prequel trilogy, especially when it comes to the filmmaking process, very indicative of the late 90s and early 2000s. And then we have this epic final sequel trilogy that certainly represents, from The Force Awakens to The Rise of Skywalker, modern filmmaking across the board via CGI technology, writing, and pacing. I love all 3 of these trilogies, and I really love much of what I was expecting to happen. I love what The Rise of Skywalker has done when you look at all 3 of these films as a whole. We're going to have plenty of time to break down and dissect The Rise of Skywalker in the weeks to come. This is a shorter show this week, just talking about the spoilery things that I liked in the movie. But because the Star Wars franchise has done this really unique thing of 3 separate trilogies that really are little trilogy time capsules into movie making and society, because of that, Star Wars is going to last forever. Because you've got generations within generations that grew up on these films at different points in their lives. You know, the original trilogy, guys like me who saw the film when they were 5 years old in the theater, grew up with it, that's been able to experience all of these films, right? Most of us adhere to that original trilogy, and most of our thought process as we dissect these films is based off of that love of the original trilogy. And then you have the group of individuals raised on the prequels who really enjoy them, but I think have also very much enjoyed the sequel trilogy because the prequels were paced a little bit differently, weren't as slow as the 80s films of the original trilogy were, but now they've been given what we've been given in this exciting and different sequel trilogy that's very much a representation of modern filmmaking. And within this sequel trilogy, we have this amazing trio of films. We have this reestablishing of The Force Awakens when it comes to the Star Wars franchise, and very, very much filled with nostalgia while telling a new story and introducing these new characters. We have this masterpiece in the center, in my opinion, of The Last Jedi, where we start off to this rousing start in The Force Awakens, and then we get this very artful tale in the middle where everything kind of slows down, and these characters that we were introduced to in this original film are now put through their paces, setting up for this bombastic, rapidly paced, nonstop, exciting, and incredibly emotional finale to not just this trilogy. And I think it absolutely 100% works in closing out this trilogy. And I think it gets about 85% of closing out of the saga in and of itself. This movie of The Rise of Skywalker, to me, when it comes to the finale, very much had the same feeling of Revenge of the Sith, the Revenge of the Sith and its finale, especially with the closing shots of this film. One of the issues, and I've got a couple things, just complaints, but issues, and not really complaints, but issues. One of the issues that I have with the Rise of Skywalker is that I don't think that the ending, apart from what happened with Reylo, which I love and I'll get into, the ending of the battle war part of it, that's the only part of the film that I didn't think really achieved what I believe it could have. It wasn't as impactful at the end of The Rise of Skywalker, seeing the Star Destroyers falling from the sky in a couple of different locations, right? You saw the one over Cloud City, you saw the one above Endor with the Ewoks, and then you saw the Star Destroyer going down over Jakku. it didn't quite have the same sort of resonance and impact that, say, the end of Return of the Jedi had, especially with the special edition and the inclusion of those other planets. Look, I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me at all, but those are just one of the things where I go, nah, that could have been handled a little bit better. But the truth of the matter is, it really wasn't about that. Like in the original trilogy, you definitely needed to close out Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Palpatine's story. But that end battle was just set up differently, and the stakes were a little bit different, culminating in what we were all expecting to happen in the blowing up of this Death Star. And, J.J. Abrams smartly didn't go the route of a superweapon again and tried to do something unique and different with hundreds upon hundreds of Star Destroyers with Death Star tech attached to them, and this is what the Resistance needed to go and accomplish. And I thought it did it well, but it didn't have quite the same sort of stakes that you had of having to fly into a Death Star and, destroy its core to blow up the whole thing. And again, that's really petty, minor stuff that doesn't diminish at all my enjoyment of the film, and to a certain extent, in my view, is also okay from the angle that this was really Rey and Ben Solo's story at the end, and that was handled in such a way that in my view, was done so well that it's okay for me that the end battle didn't quite meet my expectations. And that was really the only thing going into this that I was kind of thinking, well, I wonder how this end space battle is going to be. And I actually thought that the space battle in and of itself was a little bit too kinetic and the shots were a little too quick. I like sort of the battles where you can follow ships around a bit and spend some time in individual dogfights. But that being said, it does still keep intact those amazing battles that came before it. And to me, there is no battle in all of Star Wars that compares to the excitement that I still feel watching the Death Star battle in A New Hope. That to me is the pinnacle of space battles within Star Wars, was that battle of the Death Star. And I like it because of its simplicity. They have a goal. Here are the ships involved. We're going to follow them through this battle. It's easy to track. And it's still incredibly exciting to watch, especially because of the special editions, right? So, with that being said, I'm totally okay with the way the Rise of Skywalker handled that end battle. All right, so let me get into one more big elephant in the room, and then I'll do some bullet points about my thoughts on the show. And again, it's going to be a shorter show this week just because of what's been happening in my old household and making sure that people have the access to the rooms, especially where I have to go and record the podcast. And we're going to have plenty of time next week and heading into next year to really break this whole thing down. But let me go ahead and give my thoughts up front, and then I'll go through some bullet points of the film and things that kind of stuck out when I'm just hammering away at my notepad about things that resonated with me enough to where I wanted to go and put them down. Instinctive reactions. Let's talk Reylo for just a minute, and I'll get into a little bit more of this when I go through my bullet point list. I like the way that they handled this. And I know there's a lot of individuals, and many of you have reached out to me and expressed your frustration with Ben Solo's passing. I think there is a version of this film where Ben Solo could have lived at the end. Rey could have returned to celebrate with her friends the victory over the rise of the victory over the final order of Palpatine. She could have returned in the X-Wing and then left from there in the Falcon to Tatooine to bury the sabers, at which point in time Ben could have been waiting for her. I think there is a version of that movie that works. That being said, though, it only works, in my view, it only works from a surface level standpoint. The moment you start to break down him living, the excuses pile up as to why he shouldn't be alive anymore. I know that J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio had to deal with the passing of Carrie Fisher. I thought they handled Princess Leia and using the leftover footage as best as they could, and I thought it worked well. If it hadn't been for the fact that I know, that we all know, that that's not Carrie Fisher filmed for The Rise of Skywalker, that's Carrie Fisher filmed for The Force Awakens, I probably wouldn't even give it much of a second thought. I thought it was handled well. And using Carrie Fisher as a mechanism for Kylo Ren's death and Ben Solo's redemption, I thought was a very smart move. I like the fact that there is some ambiguity to the Force in the film in and of itself. And it doesn't, while it answers questions that we wanted to know, Rey's parentage, what's going to happen to Ben, things like that. When we get into Rey confronting Darkseid Rey on the Death Star 2, right? And they don't really give an explanation to that, and I'm cool with that. I'm cool with leaving that a bit of a mystery. I chalk it up to Luke going into the Force tree and the experience that he had facing Vader. I am going under the assumption that it was Leia who allowed Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, to remember and see a vision of Han Solo in that moment, and that's part of what drained her life force, and that if it hadn't been for her passing and draining her life force to help Ben, he wouldn't have been distracted in that moment, and at the end, he wouldn't have been able to transform into the Force. I am okay that he wasn't there as a Force ghost at the end of the film, because I believe that Force ghosting is something that Jedis need to be trained to do. And so unless it was established that he was trained on how to do that, I don't imagine that he would be a Force ghost. And again, he was able to disappear into the Force only because of what his mom was able to do in sacrificing her life force. And I find a lot of parallels to Revenge of the Sith in that moment. But the truth of the matter is that Ben Solo was responsible for billions of deaths, and he killed his father. And at the end of the day, if we are looking at this from a this really happened standpoint, when you look at a person like Ben Solo who's redeemed, we can treat it as a fairy tale and everything's nice and happy, and Rey and Ben Solo can go off and be on their own someplace else. But I guess in sort of rationalizing or justifying his passing away, I have to throw out there, but how would Ben Solo be with all of the evil that he perpetuated in his life beforehand? What kind of life would that have been for either of them? And let's not forget the fact that Rey and Kylo Ren have this connection, right? It's the dyad in the film, right, that ends up being the core at the end that helps to defeat Palpatine. And I love that concept. I thought it was great. But it reminds me a lot of Han and Leia and how Han and Leia were handled in The Force Awakens, where when we have enough time passed, we realize that these were actually two very different people. Now, again, you can treat it as a fairy tale. They can go off to live happily ever after, and we can kind of go off in our headcanon. But I'm afraid that it kind of falls apart under scrutiny with Ben Solo living, even though that's a happier ending, because, well, is he dealing with PTSD? Do these two individuals have anything in common beyond this conflict that they've been involved in after this short period of time that they've been together? It makes more sense to me and more sense to the story that these two were thrust together on an emotional level, ending in this amazing embrace and kiss at the end of the movie, which is incredibly realistic and authentic for the moment in time, but it is just a moment in time. He is redeemed and he transforms into the Force. And as a Christian in and of myself, right, and we do with these films what we want to do with these films, as a Christian myself, and having my own belief in God and what happens with the afterlife, for me, Ben Solo passing into the Force was the best thing that could have happened to him. His time within the galaxy, living in a galaxy far, far away, was over. He was redeemed, and he is in a better place now, right? Celebrate those who transform into the Force. Mourn them, do not. Miss them, do not. Going back to Yoda and the teachings. I thought all of that was handled great. I really did. A top to bottom, the whole arc of Kylo Ren and leading into Ben Solo and his arrival on Exegol at the end of the film and coming in there and taking on the Knights of Ren was so meaningful, and he was so incredible in those moments. And I can't wait to get into the theater here in now an hour and 15 minutes and see the movie again. All right, let's get into a few of these, a few of the things in the film that really intrigued me, that I really enjoyed. And again, this is going to be a shorter show than normal for this spoiler-filled review. There'll be a full show and video coming again next week that'll include all of your listener feedback. So, the opening crawl was detailed and ominous. My buddy Drew, who I do the show with, Justice and Drew on Twin Cities News Talk, I know he was a bit put off by the crawl because there was so much packed into it. But I kind of appreciate that, because these are films that are going to be rewatched over and over and over again. And that initial viewing for me every single time is always one of, okay, what's going to happen now? How are we going to deal with this? What's going to go on? And you always kind of walk out of the film overwhelmed. It takes a couple of viewings for me to let the film soak in. To the point of how much I love the film, though, and I got to get to my bullet points here, but I just remembered, to the point of how much I love the film, when I walked out of The Force Awakens, I walked out thinking I really enjoyed that, but I wasn't that impacted emotionally. I was drained because I finally saw it after all the buildup. And it wasn't until seeing it multiple times that I really grew to love it and could really sit back and relax. The Last Jedi, same thing. Walked out going, holy cow, that was a movie. But I wasn't enthusiastic about it right out of the gate. It was the second viewing that I went, wow, that was fantastic, right? When I walked out of The Rise of Skywalker, I was excited, I was emotional, and I was incredibly happy. And I knew the moment that I walked out, even though I was having those same emotional feelings as before of having to take it all in, I walked out with a sense of satisfaction in a way that I did not walk out of The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, which spoke to me about how much I really did love the film because I reacted in a more positive way than I did episodes 7 and 8. I loved seeing Rey as a full-fledged Jedi. I felt like for those that wanted to see Luke in The Force Awakens or The Last Jedi being a full-fledged Jedi, thinking that, well, you got that in Return of the Jedi, but I want more of that. They gave it, J.J. Abrams and Chris Terrio gave that to us in The Rise of Skywalker, and I love how confident she is. I love the fact that she is a Palpatine, which goes far to explain why she's so powerful, and the movements and the actions and the force powers in the film reminded me a lot of the prequels, and it was awesome to see Rey like that. The pacing at the movie was, from the start, was brisk but needed. And on a second viewing, I actually appreciated how we went bam, 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 got into it, and then the movie kind of pumped the brakes a little bit as we marched towards the finale. As I said before, the Kylo Ren and Ben arc I thought was absolutely fantastic. The Return of the Emperor, just go with it, and I did. You know what? I mean, and again, Star Wars requires a bit of that. You accept that he's back, you know. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities some would consider to be unnatural. And look, here's Snoke and a bunch of Ats. I was Snoke too. I'm cool with it. That works for me. Let's move on, right? It's kind of like I had no clue about him in Return to the Jedi or his background. They did enough with the Revenge of the Sith callback. I was totally fine with his return, and I thought that he was scary as all get out. Pisana meeting Lando, I thought was done really, really well. I thought that Billy D. Williams did a fantastic job with his time on screen. The speeder chase very much evoked the pod race to me, and I thought that sequence was great, and I really enjoyed it. And this movie, J.J. Abrams does this. Seeing it a second time, I was thinking, well, if I need to use the restroom, when do I want to go? And then I realized I don't want to go to the restroom. There is no point in this movie where I want to go to the bathroom because there's no point of the film that I want to walk out on, right? Whereas when I went to go see The Last Jedi, I would go usually and use the restroom when the Canto Bight sequence started, or sometime within the Canto Bight sequence, and maybe when Rose and Finn were meeting DJ. But even now, I love watching those particular moments of the film. But when it comes to The Rise of Skywalker, there isn't any part of the movie where I want to go to the bathroom more or less or want to skip, because all of the film is very meaningful and every single scene is incredibly enjoyable. The healing of the Sand Snake, I thought was done very well. Didn't linger on it too long. Showed that Rey had this force power. Nice call over to the Mandalorian. So I thought that it was interesting that the child ended up using that force power to kind of introduce us for those that are watching the Mandalorian prior to the Rise of Skywalker. The standoff between Kylo Ren and Rey, fantastic. The jumping over the TIE Whisper, taking it out, leading to the force grab in the sky, and seeing it a second time, I remember thinking to myself that that's how both Adam Driver and Daisy Ridley did a fantastic job of just acting with their hands in that moment. And that was a jaw-dropping moment for me. All of Kijimi, I thought was really interesting. I liked that city. I liked the dynamic of it. I thought Zori Bliss was great in that role. I would love to see more of her. I thought that Kerry Russell did a fantastic job behind that mask, acting. Rey meeting Dark Rey was fantastic. The Death Star 2 moment was great. That whole battle was exciting and different and dynamic. And again, reminded me a lot of the prequels in the end. Everything happens for a reason in this film, and no moment is wasted, in my opinion. I know it's a bit convoluted, and it's dense on story, and it does play out kind of like a video game, but I think that's kind of cool. It kind of is this Indiana Jones-esque, we've got to do this to get this to go to this. And I know a lot of people have been complaining about the video game style of it, but I happen to really love it for that. The moment when Han Solo showed up for that face-to-face with Ben Solo, I was bawling. I was bawling my eyes out. And I love the parallels when it comes to The Force Awakens, right before Kylo Ren cuts his dad down. And again, it's a reminder that he did kill his father, which I think lends to the rationale that he's going to get redeemed and he's going to help Rey come back to life and defeat the Emperor. But, he's going to have to give his life and transform into the Force because of what's happened before him. All right. What else do we want to get into? Let's dive into a few other things. I'm looking at the clock, and again, I had to keep this short this week, but let me just grab onto a few of the big things for me, and we'll spend some more time breaking this down on future episodes. But the raising of the X-Wing on Ahch-To, all of the stuff with Luke and Rey on Ahch-To I thought was fantastic. There was one thing that I always wanted on a very surface level, and I've mentioned this on the show throughout this whole trilogy. I wanted to see Rey pilot an X-Wing. That's just something that I wanted in the trilogy. I just thought it would be incredibly unique and would be a nice way to sort of bridge her connection from a character standpoint to echo Luke Skywalker. The fact that it was Luke's X-Wing that she ended up flying on Ahch-To made it even better. I'm ignoring the fact that Luke has a door on his hut that's the wing of an X-Wing, and they never bothered to explain that. I'm not going to let it bother me. It's a bit of a plot hole. There's another one, too, that I'll mention here in a moment. It's a bit of a plot hole, but I don't care. Maybe let's just say there was another X-Wing fighter that happened to be on that planet. Or we'll just say maybe it wasn't an X-Wing all along, and they can fix it with the special edition of The Last Jedi down the road. I thought the Luke and Leia training sequence was great. I could see why that was supposed to be longer, but they shortened it. But I thought it was handled really well. It was another just jaw-dropping moment for me. Rey on Tatooine, I thought worked. I don't for a second believe she's staying there. And my takeaway from Rey at the end of the film on Tatooine was that she removed those kyber crystals from Luke and Leia's sabers, buried them, and used them to construct her new lightsaber with a yellow blade. And so I'm curious to see if the visual dictionary or if ancillary material will lay out the significance of bleeding kyber crystals and how they match the user, and if her yellow blade was indicative of her finding balance. That's what my headcanon is for that right now. And then, of course, the shot of Luke and Leia at the end of the film as Force Ghosts I thought was handled really well, leading into that closing shot of the twin sunsets with Rey and BB-8. And it's funny because I'm actually staring at the Force Awakens IMAX poster right now that has Rey standing in front of the sun on Jakku with BB-8 by her side, and it pretty much mirrors that closing shot from The Rise of Skywalker. And I thought that the ending was done perfectly with that revisit to Ahch-To at the with that revisit to Tatooine at the end. I really thought that was done very well. And I'm sorry, my wife just texted me and needed to go and use my cell phone, so I had to go and respond to that. So my apologies for being distracted on the show there for just a moment. All right, so a couple of issues with the film, just small things. There is a plot hole that I'm kind of hesitant to tell you, but I will. So, the Wayfinder. So Kylo Ren finds the first Wayfinder, which we found out in the visual dictionary. I don't have it yet. Somebody posted it on Reddit. But that apparently is Mustafar at the beginning of the film. And I guess there's some ancillary material that says that Mustafar had some vegetation growing on it again. So that was apparently Mustafar at the beginning of the film. The leaks had pointed to Kylo Ren meeting with this spider-like oracle on that planet, and that oracle giving him the Wayfinder. They See, this is why I have to keep the show shorter, because my wife just popped in and needed my cell phone and was very confused because she's heading off somewhere for just a moment. Okay, so Wayfinder, real quick plot point. Kylo Ren had the Wayfinder on his TIE Whisper. That's the TIE Whisper at the beginning of the film, or towards the beginning of the film, that he crashes in his fight against, and it blows up in his fight against Rey. He has a second TIE Whisper that he takes to Kijimi, and then to the Death Star 2 wreckage on Endor. That's the second one. That's the one that Rey flies to Ahch-To and that she burns, but ends up finding the Wayfinder inside. So I suppose we're supposed to assume that Kylo Ren removed the Wayfinder from his original TIE fighter, or maybe he had it in a different location and put it on his new one. So that's a bit of a plot hole, but not a huge one. Like I mentioned earlier, the end space battle, I think it needed to be a little bit more linear for me, but the whole film was filled with enough exciting spaceship shots that it didn't bother me all that much. I mentioned Luke's hut door. I'm going to ignore that for just a second. And the Knights of Ren were kind of a waste in the movie, but at the same time, I didn't really care about the Knights of Ren to begin with, so that whole part of it didn't really bother me at all. I'm not going to rank the film amongst the other movies yet. All these films are very different. I will say that I did enjoy it more than The Force Awakens. It is going to be one of the types of Star Wars films that I will revisit often because there's so much packed into it. It's something that I say about Ready Player One, because Ready Player One embodies a lot of everything that I love within film because of the nature of how the movie is, and so I watch it a lot, because if I'm in a geeky mood but I don't know exactly what genre I want to get into, I'll throw Ready Player One in. But The Rise of Skywalker, if I'm going to sit down and watch a sequel film, it's really going to be depending on mood. If I want to watch something deep with depth and I want to get into some characters and just sit down and enjoy an experience, right? It's The Last Jedi. But if I want to just wipe out on Star Wars and just have a fun ride for 2.5 hours, I'm throwing in The Rise of Skywalker when it's released. I will share more of my thoughts about the film. I really did love it. I loved it as much as I loved the other films, if not at the moment more in the short period of time than I did the Last Jedi or The Force Awakens. It'll take some time for me to absorb it. And, watch it further to sort of land on ultimately where I feel it, where it lands in my mind in terms of all the other movies. But like all the other Star Wars films, I love it. And it's different. And Star Wars can be whatever Star Wars needs to be and whatever it wants to be. And I think that's what makes it great. All three of these trilogies, and I'll bookend the show this week, all three of these trilogies are very indicative of the times when they were created, and we've gotten something unique that's never been done in the history of cinema. And that is three specific trilogies that represent three very specific moments in time in society. And that's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible. And I know that Kathleen Kennedy had said that they were going to abandon the trilogy format moving forward, and maybe if they go something along the Bond route, that'd be kind of cool if they started doing films like they do the Bond movies, where some of them can connect. And I know there's trilogies within the Bond films, right? Certainly with the newer ones, with the Daniel Craig, those three films of Casino Royale. I own these films for crying. Let me turn around and look. Quantum of Solace and Skyfall is kind of a trilogy, but we're getting another one with No Time to Die. So that being said, I think that there's something to that trilogy arc. And I'm glad to see that it's doing well in the box office, too. It's bringing in some really good dollars. The box office has gone down a little bit. I don't care about that. I just wanted to see it be successful, and it's going to be successful. And that's great, because I just want to make sure they keep making Star Wars movies for the big screen. And it'll be very interesting to see what they have planned for us coming up in 2022. All right, that's all I got time for today. And I rushed through this show much like they rushed through the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker, but I hope that it was just as exciting as the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker. And I do want to hear from you, because next week's show, the last show of the year, will be the listener feedback extravaganza. So talkshownerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment on YouTube. I look forward to hearing from more of your comments, and thank you to everybody who has written to me so far. Again, I will be sharing all of your thoughts coming up on next week's show. Have a Merry Christmas, and And again, like I said in the spoiler-free episode, I really hope that you had fun watching this film. And I know a lot of people have issues, and I understand that, and you can feel however you want to feel. But for me, I loved it, and I can't wait to get into the theater 1 hour from now and watch it again, which means I really got to go. Thanks for listening. Talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.